There we go. Okay, I would like to call the meeting to order for the Zoning Design Review Board for Tuesday, November 14th. You guys want to do roll call?
Yes. All right. Member Laz?
Here.
Member Denton?
Here.
Member Allen?
Here.
Chair Cook?
Here.
All right. Let the record show that Vice Chair Tigert is excused.
All right. All rise for the Pledge of Allegiance, please.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Does anybody have anything they want to add to the agenda? Okay, then will somebody make a motion to adopt the agenda?
I'll make a motion to adopt the agenda
Second?
for November
I'll
14th.
second it.
All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? No one? I would open the public comment for items not on the agenda, but we do not have any public tonight, so I will close that. And we can move on to presentation and discussion, 17-1463.
Great. Well, before you this evening, and also included in your agenda packets that were posted and available online and emailed, is a land use element objectives and policies matrix. As you all know, the Envision Yountville effort is tied to a comprehensive update of the general plan. The town advisory group over the last several months have been meeting monthly to tackle different elements of the general plan, starting with noise and safety, then also covering open space and conservation. Last week, the advisory group took a look at the matrix that's before you, talking about the land use element, which, to put delicately, is the beefiest of the elements that we're going to be covering in this general plan update. So we wanted to bring this before the ZDRB because of all of the elements of the general plan, land use is the most ZDRB-ish of them all, and we wanted to get your input on it. So hopefully you had opportunities to review the policies, made notes. We're here to answer questions, but we also want to get your feedback. If there are policies on this matrix that stick out to you more than others, we want to know. We want to know what you're thinking. If there's some you strongly support, say we need to absolutely retain this one, or hey, maybe we should revise this one for this update of the general plan. We want to know. We will take your comments back to the town advisory group to let them know ZDRB's opinion, and it'll also be kind of included when we then bring the actual draft general plan update back to you. After the advisory group looks at all of the elements, staff will take all of their comments, prepare a draft general plan to then bring to the ZDRB, get your opinion on it. We're also going to be bringing it to the other boards and commissions of the town, like the Arts Commission, like the Parks and Rec Advisory Commission, and get all of the stakeholder input. After all that is done, we take it to the town council for them to either adopt it or rewrite the whole thing. It's hopefully it's not a rewrite. We're gonna get a with plenty of opportunities for public input along the way. Now, before we dive into these policies, there's a few things we wanted to share with you that we really want the ZDRB to talk about, and a lot of it happens to do with the residential development standards. Big question we want to talk about is whether we should the standards for single-family houses give owners more flexibility. We need to determine right now if our current standards, like floor area ratio or setbacks or building height, whether they're too restrictive. Are we not allowing property owners to do what they want with their property enough? That's going to be a conversation we have tonight. Along with the master plan residential zoning district, could we maybe edit those design standards in order to allow an appropriate amount of growth? So take a look at the screen. The slide in front of you summarizes just the residential zoning districts, while the map on the wall there shows all of our zoning districts, residential and commercial. This here on the screen only shows the residential zoning districts. And you'll also notice there's a lot of yellow on that. That yellow one is master planned residential. And that's going to be a big focus of our talk tonight. So first, floor area ratio. I know we just did an FAR ordinance, it seems like, with the FAR and open space, where we also addressed parking standards. But I wanted to revisit it to make sure everyone understands fully what it is and to see if there's any areas for modification. We know, you can interrupt me anytime you want if you have questions, or if you're saying, Nate, we get this. So FAR, most neighborhoods have a max FAR of 30%. So if you have a 4,000 square foot lot, you can build a 1,200 square foot home. It's pretty much that simple way. Based on our most recent update of the ordinance, we established that FAR is meant more to address the massing of a building rather than the square footage of the building, which is why things like basements aren't counted in the FAR calculation. There's also restrictions regarding the height of homes that would be an important thing to address, because the second story of a home ties into that FAR and clearly affects the building massing. So what this map here shows is the capacity of each of these parcels and areas in town, to see which one have already maxed out already on FAR and which have room to grow. And if you take a look, if you can see my cursor here, this area, that Washington Square area, it's either at capacity or more. If you take a look, it's pretty condensed massing there. The areas of town that are not built to capacity is actually down here, that Mulberry Street, Toyon Terrace neighborhood. And Sandra and Curtis, you can jump in anytime you want as well. This Toyon Terrace neighborhood, you'll notice, has quite a bit of room to grow. As this photo here shows, you don't see a lot of two-story homes there because of that 50% rule. But also, they're already meeting the FAR standard for that neighborhood. And so there's kind of a, I don't want to say missed opportunity, but due to the current standards, it limits any potential growth that property owners there might want to do.
Oh, Nathan, sorry.
Yeah.
What's the FAR for the Toron Terrace?
30%. Yeah. So, and you're all aware of the 50% rule, how no more than 50% of any single family dwelling units on a block can be 2 stories. We have some exceptions to the rule that were approved as a master development plan. But I'd say for the majority of town, it is honored. And you usually see a good mix of 1 and 2 stories, unless you're in those more challenging, those more challenging neighborhoods where the FAR rules make them unable to go to the second story. I want to for sure focus. So there's the condominiums like Oak Circle and Crossroads that have all gone 2-story. But the Vista condominiums, which is that big yellow section near the center of town, is all 1 story. It was approved as a master development plan to just have a whole bunch of 1-story condos. And so what we would like the ZDRB to discuss and give our feedback on is, would you be willing, or how do you feel about allowing the Vista condos to go to 2 stories and also relaxing the FAR calculation standards a bit in order to allow them to do that? So that could be a discussion that we have later. Actually, I want to have it now. So
Yeah, let's go them
the
one by
2
one.
items I really just want to talk about, and that concludes these presentations. You can go back to any of those slides. Before we go into these policies, I want to talk about going to 2 stories at Vista condos, and specifically, perhaps looking at different FAR standards for the Toyon Terrace neighborhood, and give me your thoughts on the 2-story rule. The Toyon Terrace neighborhood is Larkspur, Mulberry,
Oh, right, okay.
that one
Got
there.
it, Yep.
Didn't know there was a
Okay.
name for that.
This is going to be casual, so anybody that wants to chime in.
So if the Vista condos, if it became, if we said, okay, let's change this and let's revise this, what would be the FAR then if it were 30, if it was 30%, or if it is 30% now, what would that increase be then?
We'd likely, and Sandra can jump in, we'd likely go up to 40%, which would give them enough room to
build
go
this.
2 stories.
We don't know exactly where the FAR is for that property based on the time it was developed, but if you look at a map of the property, they have great expanses of open space that
Right.
break up the massing. When you look at all of the condominium projects in town, they're all 2-story with the exception of this one and Burgundy Commons, which has a mixture of 1 and 2-story. And one of the reasons we'll be proposing this, that we're proposing it tonight and also at the workshop, is we've heard from homeowners that start out with families in these homes and they're not able to stay because
They
there's
don't
no
grow
room
it.
to expand. And we a lot of families leave town based on this neighborhood. So that's one of the questions. Although a similar question applies to the Toyon Terrace neighborhood. And I'll just jump in since you're listening now, is that those properties are most often very closely developed to their maximum FAR, and that's 30% for the house, but they get an additional 5% for the garage. And so we see a lot of 1-story houses, mostly all 1-story houses, very little massing in that neighborhood, and yet families, again, we hear from families that they can't add on a bedroom or expand in a living room enough to make a house feasible. And so one of the questions we have during our general plan update is how important is Yountville Elementary? How important is it in maintaining families in this area? We're looking longer term, 20 years. So we're asking these what-if questions as part of this update and seeing what really the community consensus is.
So the lots and the houses in Toyon Terrace are all fairly similarly sized. Do you know what sort of the average square footage of the houses are there?
No, except I would say that often when people want to do an addition, they only have about 200 square feet max that they can add on.
But are they 1,200 square foot houses, 1,700 square foot houses?
More closer, I think from my experience, it's closer to 17, 18.
Yeah.
So that's not
Somewhere
small.
between 16
Those
to
aren't
18.
small houses.
Let me, this isn't going to be up there, right?
No.
I'll find some information to share with you.
Yeah.
Okay, just curious. I mean, they're not really small. The Vista
Yeah,
condominiums
they're all
are small.
approaching their FAR already.
Yeah.
But what that means to being 16 or
Yeah,
17.
just, are they unreasonably small, or people just want?
Well, there are larger lots there than you find in most of the other areas of town, where you see very tiny. Well, take Washington Park for example.
Yeah.
Those are teeny tiny lots developed to up to a 40% FAR that doesn't include the garage, and so it just has a higher density than has been granted to more low density development like Toyon Terrace.
Okay. And how, since Vista condominiums are a development, how would you imagine people expanding? Each individual little thing could go up, home could go up 2 stories and has to retain the architectural design of the development?
Yeah. Yeah, it would need to
Maintaining
be
50%.
considered on a unit-by-unit basis. It could be a creative architecture that 2 neighbors get into together in order to have both units be risen up. It's going to be a policy, if this is something that we want to do, would need to be a policy we come up with saying if we still want to do the 50% rule with it, if we want to say have it be just like the other condos in town and go 2-story as much as you want. I mean, I might want to rely on Jared's expertise
Yes.
regarding the architecture and what could be done to make it look good.
It could be improved.
Well, unfortunately, I have a lot of information, so I'm privileged to a lot of information. I'll just say that at the moment, there's the life expectancy on the roof material is coming to its end, and so this is a very relevant topic that could be beneficial in all of that discussion, meaning, if there's a large-scale replacement coming, that could fold into a bigger discussion. So I would say that the front facade, like the garages that you see in the pictures, those would remain, but the focus would be probably replacing trusses and going vertical just over the livable space of that. I know that Vista has a number of open view corridors, and that contributes to a lot of the open space, but definitely, what do you know what Washington Park, you were mentioning 40% FAR approximately
It's around there, yeah.
for the master development?
That's why.
Maximum-ish.
Yeah, that's why you probably haven't noticed as many additions coming before you
Right.
in that neighborhood. They're mainly in Old Town.
Well, it's also mastered
Yeah.
plan, so.
Thanks.
I'll also add to that conversation is I've often looked at some of the open space, particularly around the retirement center that Vista has, as a potential additional opportunity for more units.
Put a
to
couple
be-
more units there.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah, there's a lot of space, and
What's the percentage of Vista that's being rented out versus occupied by primary owners? Do you know?
We will
Roughly?
know once all of the rental permit applications come in, and that starts in January.
Okay.
But of the more than 50 that we've received already, wouldn't you say there's probably 5 or 6 that we've gotten already in that neighborhood?
Oh, definitely.
Yeah.
so 10% so far.
So far.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes, that's as I thought it was.
And that's just for people who are applying early to get their permit.
Being honest,
Yeah.
yes.
So then, Chair Cook, in answer to your question, I just searched 4 different parcels in the Toyland Terrace neighborhood. They range anywhere from 1,500 square feet to about 2,500 square feet. We do see large lot sizes, though, in the 7,000 and 8,000 square foot ranges.
So it's not like it's a struggling area that, size-wise. I mean, those are decent-sized houses.
I would say that the larger lots are facing the vineyard views. So the main corridors that are running east-west. In the many years that I've practiced architecture, there have been clients that have been wanting to expand above the 1,500 square foot. The floor plans are usually 3 bedrooms, and so typically the living room spaces are very tight and small. So
Yeah, and I could say what we do hear from more neighbors or residents in that neighborhood than the other districts is that the houses just don't accommodate their families if they have 2 children.
Yeah, it's been a common, the town advisory group at least mentioned this thing in the Vista condos and Mulberry Street, since these were also topics of conversation there. Many members talked about couples they knew that once they had their second kid,
They're out of here.
yeah. So I think similarly to the historic district, isn't there a 6,000 square foot lot and above there's a different floor area ratio than the lower? So that may be a way to accommodate some of the structures that are smaller. I would personally feel like the ones that are along the backside that are 2,500 square feet and above, that maybe collectively we don't give the same perspective on those.
right?
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah, easily some kind of, I guess, cap could be put on saying for every lot square footage less than blank, your FAR
Yeah.
could go up to 40.
To go.
Just space use and architecturally, I could say the Vista condominiums are certainly due for something,
Yeah.
some sort of consideration.
Room for improvement.
Yeah.
Okay.
I don't know if anybody else. Yeah.
Yeah, it's time to do it.
For sure. Go on the second floor. Let them.
I don't know if I can comment on that. So
We're not making any decisions,
Yeah.
so there's
Okay.
no things like that. But
But it seems reasonable. I mean, there's a lot of empty space. There's a lot
There's
of.
a lot of space there. And you're not in a focal section. I mean, you're kind of, it's not like you're right on the main street. I mean, you're set back from any, it's hidden. It seems like it's just like,
Right.
and if it gained a second floor, I don't even know how noticeable it would be to anybody other than the people that are benefiting. You know?
Well, could they expand the single floor footprint? Does that make sense?
No, I think the way that
Even pushing forward.
the structure is set up, in other words, the fractional use of common space, et cetera, that would be very complicated
Yeah.
to address. I think the one item that I would still continue to push a little bit would be some of the available open space. I know one of the, maybe 10 years ago, as I contemplated that, having some of the infill in some of the open areas. In other words, whatever the number of units, maybe it's 70, that seems to ring a bell. If there would be provisions to allow for the master, so it's a master development, so that would be complicated to add, 2 extra homes or 4 extra homes. That may be another option that would be nice to consider.
Right. Not just adding to the existing.
Exactly.
But make new
Creating.
ones.
Creating new ones for new housing opportunities.
Yeah.
The other thing
And
you
there's
have-
always the potential of amending, and again, I'm not making any recommendations or anything.
Amending the master plan.
But amending the master development plan for that site to include new two-story ones that are built. So you now have some one-story and two-story ones existing in the same space.
Yeah.
And
If
then
you're
you have to
going to
think
go
about-
2 stories, there are 4 units per building, so they have to go up at the same time. So,
Good.
May-
It depends on
yeah.
how they
Yeah.
plan it.
yeah.
Yeah.
Were you going to
You
say
also have
something?
to consider too, then, with the 50% that we're talking about, it kind of plays into 50% 2 stories, is that wouldn't be,
Doesn't apply here because they're not single-family
uh,
dwellings.
they're not single,
So the 50% rule really, if you're
it's
going
only
to look
for
at
the
it
town,
just
Old
at,
Town and for,
yeah, if you're going to look at by zoning district, it would apply to Old Town, single-family
Single-family, yeah.
residential, and some
Mixed
mixed
residential.
residential.
makes sense.
So
I say some because
the entire vista could
So the whole
go
thing could be
second
2
story.
stories then.
But it has the space around it, that wouldn't look that unusual, I would think. Good?
yeah,
Okay.
Great.
I think we got a good idea of where you're leaning on it. You can correct me if I'm wrong, but it feels like there's consensus to being willing to look at Vista condos and to look at Mulberry with conditions under the right circumstances,
Depending on the square
looking
footage
at
of the
some
sp-
kind of cap based on lot size.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
So we've also shared the land use matrix with you, with the evaluation of existing land use policies with recommendations to retain it, to revise it, or delete it. And in the staff recommendation column, we've posed some questions, and if you are so inclined, we'd be interested in knowing what you feel about some of those questions that we're asking as to building height and development on Washington Street in the single-family or in the Old Town Historic District. This is really our chance to go to you and to get your comments on all of these land use policies, if you have anything to share on them.
What were my notes? My notes aren't making sense. Do you want us to go through one by one and just each comment on
Board
ones?
chair, I mean, maybe we take per section, like section 1 and 2, see if there's
Yeah.
comments, field comments.
We could do
Yeah,
that.
we could take them as a block.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
And
any
if
comments?
anything caught your eye?
Yeah.
Where, I'm not,
So if you look on page 2,
Finding it.
might be the best one since those first 3 policies are more of just how this whole thing works.
oh, the 3 stars.
But on
Okay,
page
that's what I
2,
was
you'll see a
looking
thing
for.
that says Objective 1, enhance local identity and sense of community. You can just
Oh, no.
perhaps ask, hey, any questions about Objective 1? And then Objective 2, then Objective 3.
Okay,
Oh, got it.
got it. Yeah, objective 1, enhance local identity and sense of community. Did anybody see anything there that they needed to discuss?
Yeah.
Okay.
Just,
I didn't either.
I agreed with everything, just
Yeah.
was curious as an open discussion about 1.8. with the vacation rental. There's
Yeah.
any comments or thoughts?
It's included in there as a new policy because it wasn't in the old general plan. And staff is thinking, how do you all feel about having it in the general plan?
And this is staff's recommendation, given existing policy on vacation rentals. It is a question that we're posing at the workshop to see how the community as a whole feels about it, whether it's the right policy, whether it's too strict, it should be loosened, maybe a certain number of vacation rentals in town. We're proposing this based on the pulse of the town at the time.
Okay. So that's sort of not been defined yet?
Well, it's a new policy that hasn't been in the general plan before.
Yeah, it's a recommended policy to maintain the vacation rental restriction, but it is a more open discussion item at the workshop. So we'll see if
So we'll
the
let that go to the
community
workshop.
agrees,
Okay.
yeah, or not.
Okay. Okay, objective 2, preserve and enhance the small town character, scale, and pace of life in Yountville and town's connection to its natural surroundings.
These are really the development standards.
Yeah.
Addressing height and setbacks and all the
Okay.
variety of items.
The one that stood out to me was 2.4,
Yeah.
maximum building height. That's something we need to discuss.
What are your thoughts?
So that it starts on the bottom of page 3.
What are your thoughts?
I don't think there's much support for a third story. Didn't that come up in the general plan, Envision Yountville meetings? We had the
Part of the quick polling, yes.
polling, yeah, and there was no support for that.
There's one question on it that said, just very broadly, how do you feel about 3 stories? And from that workshop, they weren't.
It was pretty negative.
Yeah.
Okay. I agree with that.
Yeah, I agree.
I would be the counter. So I would say that the only way for potential growth and stuff is to have sensible growth and
To literally grow.
and on that side of the street is the one that seems less objectionable, less controversial because it doesn't affect the residential neighborhoods, and I understand the sensitivity on that side. So I think there needs to be some tool in the general plan for the next long block of period here that allows some flexibility to have the town thrive or grow in some sustainable way.
So the west side could be 3 stories and grow tall, and then the east side would never.
So
grow
basically
tall.
that red area on the map,
Right, so the west side.
adjacent to the freeway,
Right.
but any of the buffer or transitional spaces to the residential old town and stuff would not, is the way that I understand that was.
West side of
We'll-
Washington.
We'll be sharing some images at the workshop that explore that idea a little bit more, so
Yeah.
we'll see more what the
Yeah,
community
the
feels.
visual on that. Is that what the Sim City is going to be about?
Yeah, I
Look at
mentioned
your town
it.
on the west side that's like skyscraper-like, and then on the east side, it's like only 1 story, Busan.
Well, trivia for you. Are there any 3-story buildings in town?
Yeah. Right? Grosinger's?
Maison Fleury, right across the street, is a 3-story building. And,
I never thought that.
right,
Not
but
that high.
if you take a look at it, it's 3 stories.
Okay.
And so that's going to be a visual shared at the workshop. And I mentioned to member Laz, just for some context, because the workshop on the 21st is going to be about land use and
Sorry, I'm missing
development, I joked that it's like we're all playing SimCity with Yountville by saying, well, what if this goes here? What if this goes here? How would it all
Yeah.
look?
It's also interesting to note that the Marketplace is a 40-foot building, and it's a 2-story building at 40 feet,
Right.
but 30 feet is the town's maximum height limit. And so to sort of just understand what that massing is in terms of,
That's why I was.
When we're talking
that's why I
2 and
thought that was a
3-story.
3-story, I guess.
And I guess I could also propose, if you could regulate that and how it looks by coming up with more complicated floor area ratios, whether it be like a tent, where there's an
Yep.
apex in the middle, so it forces the 2-story or 1-story towards the street fronts. So there's ways to incorporate that into the
Right.
code to help mitigate these stark 3-story massing. But
Absolutely.
What's the height of Maison Fleury?
we're trying to find out, we don't know.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's somewhere between 1 and 40 feet.
That's why it's hard to
We know it
imagine
is
that's, yeah.
shorter than
It's
V
short, yeah.
Marketplace, but
We're
yet it's still
guessing-
3 stories.
We're guessing it's somewhere between 32 and 36.
Yeah.
We're going to try to get an answer to that.
Okay, I could see, well, now that Jared puts it that way, I could see maybe some. But I like being able to see the hills on that side. I like that there's
Yeah.
not towering buildings on one side. I like,
I
it
even
keeps
think-
the rural sort of feel to it, to see the
Even
hills
as you're
there.
driving on Highway 29 heading north, you can actually look down into the town and you can see the entire scope of the town, which I think is beneficial.
Just
If
the,
you just saw buildings, tops of rooftops with, air conditioning units, you'd be like, okay, keep driving.
Absolutely, yeah.
So the optics heading north, I think, is just as important. I mean, that's why the whole signage issues, and what you're seeing as you head north on 29, backing up to, where Carroll is and all.
Okay, anybody else have any other thoughts?
Yeah.
Or looking at the rest of
just one more.
2?
2.1, just a side comment that for anybody interested in compatibility of development and stuff, I would recommend Pattern Language by Christopher Alexander. Some well-versed
Yeah.
information there.
Oh, just changing.
Oh, just a general comment that there's some really great examples of, of urban development and what's worked well for centuries, and I'm sure you guys.
Thank you.
Basically, on 2.4.2, I do agree with the strong preference for single-story elements along the street frontage. I think that makes a nice look, like the way Stewart did it. Edwards James Courtyard, yeah. I agree with that. And then it also gets into the 50% rule.
Yeah.
Is that too restrictive and out of sync? Any opinions?
Yeah.
I know, I was waiting for you.
It's like it's too restrictive.
I think the time has come to to move on from that one. We've reinvented all of the infill lots. We've looked at a lot of remodels have occurred in town, so there's just no flexibility anymore to be creative and come up with new housing or added housing. So this seems like it's been an ongoing issue for at least a decade. It seems like we're at the general plan. It's an appropriate time to reconsider.
So what would you support then? That
Yeah, I
everything be able to be, or 20%, or what? 1 out of every 5 houses?
No, I don't want to get into percentages anymore.
Right.
I think what I've floated amongst some of you has been rather than discussing about the first story or 2-story discussion, really focus in on the massing, particularly on the side yard setbacks, and come up with a way to either limit the plate height or something where it allows the homeowners, architects, and stuff to be creative with that central massing. Obviously, I'm concerned about windows looking into adjacent neighbors and the overall flat vertical face of a massing. But I think there's different approaches or different ways to control the massing and scale.
We've proposed a potential new policy for this in Section 6 called Scale of Development.
What page is that?
It's on page 12, the first item. And so, Jared, seeing how you think this could be changed to better incorporate some of your concerns would be of interest to us. This, of course, is a policy that would then be used to help inform zoning and design ordinance standards that are more specific, that speak to side yard setbacks and plate height and all of those other issues that are specific.
Because keep in mind, general plan policies are purposely vague, and then ordinances, like the zoning ordinance and design ordinance,
Are
is where you get in the specifics of FAR's 25%.
Yeah. Depends on the details. I don't.
Okay.
That's a very broad statement, so I don't know if I have any comments on that one, other than it looks good as a general statement.
Okay, thank you.
In general, though, the one neighborhood that has gone, that was developed mostly all two-story, the Washington Square?
Yeah.
Yountville Square.
Yountville Square. Can't say I'm a fan of two-story next to two-story next to two-story. It's very imposing. They're all very close to the street. I wouldn't want to see everything like that.
What's interesting is that the 6 houses in the center were originally proposed as park space for those, for that residential development. And as it was going through the process, the town council is more interested in seeing more housing. So
That's too bad.
that
That would've
changed
been
as
pretty.
part of that.
Where are you talking about? Sorry.
Adams Street and
Washington
Landy?
Square, Landy,
that whole circle there.
between your house
Yep,
and Washington Park.
So
that
while those
neighborhood.
have a lot of two-story homes right next to each other, the effect is probably bigger than it is, say, on Oak Circle that's viewed here, which are also two-story condos right next to each other, partially due to the narrowness
Yes.
of that street. And so it feels
Yeah.
like it's right on top of
On
you
top
a
of
little
each
bit
other.
more
And
than
there's
maybe these that are set
small
back
front
from-
yards and small
And
backyards.
they'll have
It's all
second
side
dwellings
yards
on top of their garages and
Yeah.
they're just really maxed out.
Yeah, I don't
Yeah.
want
So it's not,
that.
yeah, that's sort of,
I see.
that center square is sort of unique to Yountville, where we've achieved more of the balance of 1 and 2 stories and more of a natural organic flow to how they're developed. That's very dense right there.
Yeah, so that
So you're
wouldn't
saying
be
you would
the
not
goal.
want to see that throughout
No.
the town? Yeah.
Yeah.
For sure.
That.
Yeah.
Okay. Um, Anything else in objective 2? Oh, I had a comment about 8.5, natural grade. Seems like, because you're talking
What
about
page number?
5, 2.8.5.
Oh, there we go. 8.5 natural grade. Okay.
5? Oh, okay.
Prohibit
Got
raising
it.
the natural grade
Page 5.
in excess of that necessary for adequate drainage. There have been some residential houses that seem to have raised their grade and makes the houses very, very large and imposing on a street. Is there some way that that can be limited? Would this limit residential?
That's why we're proposing that.
Okay.
It's speaking only to the west side of Washington, and we've noticed too that when
Okay.
grades are raised, buildings are more imposing, it pushes everything up. And then we understand that you need to deal with drainage on lots, and there's a certain level of grade changes that are necessary, but just that artificial raising for taller buildings. So we hope by deleting the qualification, it only applies to the west side of Washington, more.
So that would
easy
apply
to-
to-
Yeah.
Now apply townwide.
So we agree, Chair Cook.
Certain areas like Heritage,
built really
they had
tall.
to raise it because it was in the 100-year flood. So they had to raise the building pads. So if your lot is lower than the street, you should be able to raise it at least to the street level or higher to drain it. Is that going to be restricted here?
The key word in that policy is in excess of that necessary for adequate drainage.
Yeah.
So the adequate drainage would be, if you're in that floodplain, you need to be up a little bit more in order to have the drainage flow into the street rather
Right.
than in your property. That would be the adequate drainage.
Okay.
This policy would limit anything that's in excess of that, going above and beyond.
Okay.
Okay, 3 just sort of blends into 2.
Yeah.
Okay, there wasn't anything, there were some deletions, if anybody had any comments
Yeah,
about that.
I know the numbering gets confusing
Yeah,
because
there are a
we're
couple
going with
weird
track
ones.
changes and moving
Yeah.
things around. So if you refer to the objective that starts on page number,
okay.
that might be an easier one.
Okay, objective 4 on page 6, manage future growth to ensure an orderly development, period. Okay. Anybody have any comments then? All seem to make sense to me. Okay. 5.1 on page 7, undergrounding of utilities. was one that you kind of asked for some comment on.
Yeah, mainly just curious to see how people feel about.
Do overhead utilities, lines, and poles contribute to the rural aesthetic that makes Old Town Historic desirable? I would say heck no. That's just my opinion. I don't
Be
think,
reflected as such in the minutes.
No, I think for reliability and maintenance and all the other things, there's so many more benefits of going underground that, and due to the recent fires, I would say that
Great
there's
example,
another
yeah.
example of why underground's preferred. So that I don't see any ambiance for telephone
no,
poles.
none. It's not a charming
good.
part of Old Town.
I know.
5.4 is probably on page 8. Rural street design. Do the rural street designs of Old Town Historic contribute to the aesthetic that makes it desirable? What about street light and other improvements to make the neighborhood safe?
I'll just say it, sidewalk, curb, and gutter.
Sidewalk, curb, and gutter.
Sorry, sidewalk, what?
Sidewalk, curb, and gutter, and
In Old
other
Town.
street improvements like street lights.
What, do we know the opinion of people that live in those districts?
Somewhat. I would say, if I had to generalize,
We can get two right now
That's
with members Alan and Laz, but sorry, you can generalize too, unless you want to hear from.
I
me
would
first
say
to see-
older residents are very much in favor of the aggregate shoulder and the more sort of casual rural environment. I'd say some of the newer purchasers who are in town would really like to see curb gutter and sidewalk, maybe that keeps cars a little further away from your front porch, that manages parking in the area better. So I'd say we are really seeing a split of opinion.
If you put sidewalks and gutters in, would you be limited to parking on one side of the street?
Not likely, no. It's a wide right-of-way there.
Yeah, in some of the wider streets in town
Some of them are pretty wide.
in Old Town.
Old Town, yeah.
Those have some pretty wide streets.
I think
But
there's
some of them
one
would
more.
end up one-sided parking probably.
Possibly.
Well, Creek Street.
Yeah,
that
Creek
one,
Street's
there are
already narrow.
the exceptions, yes.
Things there by Vanderleer Park can get narrow.
But once you, like Weber's one that's fairly narrow. They can park on both sides, but if you moved everybody off the sidewalks, off the gravel and made that sidewalks,
You
then you
wouldn't
would
be able to
probably
do it, yeah.
lose. So most, the ones
Yeah.
going
Possibly.
perpendicular
Jefferson
to
is
Jefferson.
a wide street. You'd
Yeah.
be able to have
Yeah.
parking on both sides
Yeah,
there.
yeah, and the north part of it.
Madison is very wide.
Wide too, yeah.
Yeah, and Jefferson gets wider up there.
Yeah.
We'll run those calcs a little so we know at the meeting if that question comes up. Be good to know.
What bothers me currently about that neighborhood is just the inconsistency of who's in charge of the gravel, what happens to the gravel. Trees are planted in the gravel, rocks are put in the gravel. It's supposed to be for parking. Fences are out, fences are in. There's,
Yeah, everybody seems to be out for their own. There are trees planted, and then there are trees not allowed to be planted. I'm personally experiencing that. So it's like,
The
we
soft
want
edge,
to rear it in.
the soft edge of the street leads to confusion as to what's private property, what's the city responsibility. The gravel shoulders are on the private property, so it's private property that's expected to replenish the gravel from time to time, and we see that from time to time. In other places, we see that it just disappears over time and isn't replenished.
It's tough because
Higher on the maintenance.
you also see sidewalks that, if it snowed here, it'd be the responsibility of the property owner to shovel the sidewalk in front of their house. When it comes to gravel shoulders, it can get a little confusing, saying, well, it's my property, but
Whose
it's
is it?
also right of way. What do you want me to do with it? It can
Right.
get confusing, whereas sidewalks are more straightforward.
and are there, there's not gutters, are there,
Drains?
yeah.
Occasionally.
Yeah, we had to put in,
Yep.
costs a lot of money.
Yeah, so new development does bear the burden of adding new drainage structures. There are drainage problems in some areas of Old Town
Right.
Yeah,
where you see
definitely.
surface level pooling and just, there's nowhere for the water to be conveyed without
Right.
a curb helping it get to a gutter.
I think one reference may be picture Lake Tahoe developments and stuff, where it's very agrarian in nature and stuff, and they a lot of times have the rollover curbs, so it's encouraging water to go in the right direction, yet there is no sidewalks, and it has a more of a softer transition to the gravel or dirt, so I think
That makes sense.
I think there's room for a slight improvement, maybe to that level, but I still think that has somewhat of a characteristic of the old town, that it doesn't have the sidewalks. So I may be old school on that one to think that that's actually a distinguishing factor for that district.
It would really change the whole neighborhood.
It would.
Yeah.
Yeah, I do think somewhat the traffic of control, the parking, because I've told Nathan this, if you have 5 cars, no garage, you park them all on the street, you don't have a parking problem. You're also competing with visitors and people work in the area. So it's not fair to say, we don't have parking problem. We do. Depends on your perspective. Somehow, I think town needs to address that.
Did you have a comment?
I did, I was just thinking. Oh, I know, I ran into a resident who happens to live down the street from me. I don't think I'd ever met him before, but he said something to the effect of that there's an issue, especially in Old Town, with people parking in front of your walkway. And I think his name was Bob, and he was saying that it's an issue that needs to be addressed, that people shouldn't be parking there, because if you have, like, depending upon how your house is set up, because I go into the garage, I close the door, I don't really think about the front, but he's like, that's how we get into the house, and then there's a car parked there, and we have to kind of like weave around it, which was just an interesting point that he said. Because we don't address that as, you can't park in front of someone's driveway, but you can park in front of the walkway, I guess, right?
I think Joe was saying, Joe Teclamachi was saying there is work about trying to restrict parking in front of people's gate. Am I?
Well, we don't have any ordinance that explicitly says it's banned in front of gates or it's permitted, whatever there. In Old Town, there have been residents asking, saying, well, can I put something right there by the gate, or some kind of sign that says, hey, please honor the gate or anything? And the Public Works Department has been more open to having those conversations about protecting the area in front of a gate where that's the only way to get in the house. They're open to having those conversations. But at this point, there's no ordinance or any part in our municipal code that says all gates shall hereby be free.
Although it does potentially impact the number of parking spaces in town, because every 20 gates are not every 20 feet, so each gate you take out probably takes out 1 or 2 parking spaces potentially. And there are methods that property owners can use, such as indenting the gate to access it and still have access to their property. And
Or if you
so
don't have
one
a
of the-
fence. If you
Yeah, or
don't
not have a fence.
then you
And the thing
don't
is,
have a problem.
when you buy in that neighborhood, you understand what those conditions are. There's just a lot. There's a lot going on, certainly.
I could see adding streetlights, though. That would be some. Like a
I'm
good
not
thing.
sure.
No?
Because all the whole Old Town lit up after dark.
It's not. It
very
doesn't really
good when
light
you open
up
your-
the whole neighborhood,
open your
though.
window. Everything is light up outside your window. That may not be very conducive to be restful evening.
Okay. Any other comments on that? The new policies on page 9 all seem to make sense to me. Did anybody have?
The policy Y is very broad, but it makes sense.
We'll cover everything.
your job. Yeah, right.
Perfect general plan policy.
Have a plan.
And maintain it.
Yes. Why one? What was that one? C. Approve the project if it can be found that the project will generate substantial overriding public benefits, be in compliance with all the other goals, policies. What is the purpose of C?
We've added, our general plan has to go through CEQA review, and this program was added by our CEQA consultant to show that our general plan is self-mitigating, so it goes into a little greater level of detail
Okay.
toward development.
Okay.
So in other words, the state wants us to have that in there.
Required. Okay.
CEQA is the California Environmental Quality Act. So anytime there's developments, you need to make sure it's appropriate with that law.
Okay. Anything on page 10? We get into 6.1, objective.
Just a quick question on Z1. How regularly would that be evaluated every year on the development impact fees? I know it's meant to be broad, but just can you give us a flavor of what?
They're updated for cost of living annually. We do not regularly go in and do new fee studies to evaluate those fees.
So is it typically like 5 years at
Much longer.
10? Okay. All right.
Because it is, like she said, updated annually based off cost of living. So you look at
Yeah,
the
it's
consumer price
always
index,
adjusting.
what's that? Okay, up by that same percentage.
You know, they're also updated from time to time based on state law, and the state's new requirements for second dwellings have restricted the impact fees for water and sewer connections and impacts for second dwellings and granny units. So occasionally from time to time, they're updated in that manner too.
Okay. Objective, it should be 6. 6 is crossed out and it says 5, but I think you mean 6.
Yeah, we'll work it out.
Maintain land use design standards that enhance the identity and character of the town and ensure an attractive, safe, clean, accessible community. So it's talking about FAR. Is that sort of the discussion we already had?
We discussed that. Yep.
Okay.
So 6.3 looked like there was.
Yeah, that's kind of a fun one. So
Yeah,
it talks
I
about
had
the
that one
gateway
too.
design, how if you go under California, where the freeway on-ramp is right next to Hotel Yountville there, that very much has a welcome to Yountville feel to it when you go under the underpass and then up Washington Street. That has a gateway design. We're considering in this policy, discuss whether that Yountville Crossroad
Should have the same.
should have a similar welcome to Yountville design, or if Washington at Madison should have that same gateway welcome to Yountville type of, not necessarily a sign that says welcome to Yountville, but a gateway design to it.
That looks like the one that's coming from California, you mean?
Yeah, and when I,
No.
well, when I say gateway design, it doesn't just mean a sign that says Town of Yountville, lodging this way. It can be limiting the amount of development that's right there, making sure, supporting architecture.
More of an
that is
entranceway.
more open, have a nice
Landscaping,
transition into
scale of
town.
development,
Yeah.
all of that. Oddly enough, there's only the one gateway there are clearly 3 real main entries into town.
Right.
I can see doing it at Madison because it's, at Madison and 29 because it's
Significant
commercial.
exit, yeah.
The other one is residential.
I would agree. I don't see the importance on the Yountville Crossroad side because that feels like a kind of a backdoor into
Yeah,
town.
yeah, it
but
does. Yeah, and I know when we have held events like Art Sip and Stroll, all the signs are coming focused at Washington, and people coming south had no idea there's even an event coming up happening. So, if you take that a step further, can you make it so that whatever feature item, banners, things that we use to promote things in town, could be duplicated at Madison? That would make sense for people coming south. Yeah, I could see that. Anybody else?
No,
Okay.
makes sense.
It's the gateway. Objective 6, 7, residential development shall be compatible with and integrated into surrounding neighborhoods and respectful of its natural surroundings.
We talked about most of these with the discussion before we got into this, but if there's any other ones you want to get into, we can.
4.1.2. What?
The only one that I had was the mixed use. I think that's the main goal of like housing needs and stuff that the town doesn't have. You know, studio apartments, junior apartments, those type of things, and the mixed use of residential above live work units. And so I guess that was uncompacting my comment about the 3 stories on the commercial side. I'm looking for opportunities to meet different categories of housing in the town in the future, and it seems like there's not many opportunities in town. So if you put the higher density in that red zone, possibly live work structures, or
What do you mean you're looking for other opportunities? And what?
So where are we going to get more housing is the question. And the type of housing that, in order for Yountville to be more diverse, it's more like a single occupant, or, it's not necessarily single family residence that I'm as concerned about. It's how do we fill other gaps besides low income, moderate income,
So there are a
high
few
income zone.
apartments in the commercial areas of town that are above different tasting rooms. For instance, the Handwritten development that was recently approved and they're in construction right now has an apartment on the 2nd floor there.
Right.
Stewart has one as well.
Heston and Priest Ranch.
There's a member of the ZDRB who is using the one above
The North Block.
Yeah.
Right.
So they're out there, but yeah, definitely this policy would encourage it more.
Yeah.
And larger parcels could create a greater opportunity, such as on the west side of Washington, where you don't just get one unit, and where that one unit tends to be an owner's pied-à-terre or something like that. So
I don't know. I just don't see the logic of putting it over commercial space when everybody needs office space. Could we use more office space and find another place for residential?
Well, is that up to the owner's discretion, whether they use it as residential or office? No?
Depends what is conditioned in the use permit and the development.
So,
But right now, it's conditioned that they do build some sort of apartment. Right?
no.
No?
No, it depends upon the actual structure,
FAR,
right?
they're generally given 25% FAR for commercial structures. There is an FAR bonus for residential or office above, and it gets you an additional 15%. So if someone is developing a property, they want to get the most bang for their buck, and they
And they'll do
do
it.
opt for one or the other. In most cases, we've seen it be developed as residential unit.
Which is interesting, since they're always complaining about no office space. Okay. All right. Anything else on that page? Discuss where? The very bottom of 13, 7.2, residential densities. Discuss whether conditions have changed and whether residential development for 6 remaining resident parcels on Washington between Padroni and Creek. 5 of these parcels are developed with single-family residents. Would these parcels be better suited for small offices within existing structures? So we're talking about the little piece along
On the east side of Washington between Padroni and Creek, and it's basically, on the north end, it's opposite Maisonnerie. On the south end, it's at the north end of the French Laundry Garden. It's the only residential zoning on Washington Street. And so we are presenting options that would consider reusing those existing structures within the buildings as they are for maybe professional office or boutique retail or personal services, maybe adding in a requirement that a homeowner reside on property. And as part of the workshop next week, We're even throwing the question out there for redevelopment of those, although that is a challenge based on the small size of those parcels and the fact they abut residential. So by suggesting that office uses or service uses may work in those, we're looking to other communities like Napa and Sonoma, where you see that happen in the downtown in the older buildings on the commercial streets.
They would basically, because they butt up to residential, be residential commercial.
Like a residential scaled commercial.
Right.
The intent of this would, so the architecture wouldn't change
Yeah.
significantly.
I see.
However, the use
The use
inside
would
would
change.
transfer to like a professional office or a boutique
Okay.
retail or
So
boutique
then how would
lodging or
parking
something.
be taken into consideration then? If a house becomes an office, where do they park?
Be parked on site, and it's envisioned that it is a
In the front
low
yard?
impact use on existing driveways.
Yeah, because they're residential, they should have parking right now.
Yeah, but if they're a law office and they have 5 attorneys in the law office, where do those 5 attorneys park? These parking spaces don't have 5 cars, right? They've got like 2.
There is a house that's building right now, so that, right
On the
now, they're
corner.
building it, yes, residential, right? Yeah.
Yeah, it's a single-family dwelling that's being constructed. They are just getting started on foundation.
Yeah.
I see the logic of making it
The neighbors behind are
retail.
going to be very happy about that.
I mean, I think it would be a long process to change it over, but it would be nice to connect the two parts of town with office or retail or something.
Why would it be?
Just to connect the two parts of town?
Because you don't think they're connected?
No. There's north and there's south, and there's a big gap in the middle. And
Our 2-mile town is not connected, you don't think?
don't make it
It's struggled
to the north
to
part
have a
of town.
definition on the north end.
When we have done events, we can't get people up to the north end of town because there's nothing between Vandeleur sort of and
Right.
North Block.
People turn around at Vandeleur Park when they don't see anything further up.
And it's been commented that one of the reasons is there's also only sidewalk on one side of the street instead
True.
of the other.
True.
And so,
So if
part
you
of
developed
this,
it-
you could even consider saying if these are to be rezoned, would you have sidewalk on both sides of Washington so that now your main commercial corridor has
Right.
It follows that
dual-
logic, that
yeah.
if you did that, then you would do that.
So then you'd really be changing the town. I mean, that totally transforms the whole feel of the town.
at least that area,
Yeah.
those 2 blocks.
Well,
Right
in a
now,
sense,
the
then the
east
whole
side-
town, because you want it to be more, if, it would change the whole town though. Because it changes the aspect of, people, you're saying that people walked to French Laundry Gardens and then they turn around. I see them walking all the time on that other side of the street. There's a very big sidewalk that they're literally passing to get to Masonry. That's so widely walked. And also, I mean, even like with Thomas putting the picnic benches and French Laundry, so people literally eating there and staying there and, walking. I think it's actually fairly well utilized. People just probably get tired of walking maybe, and they don't want to walk on the same sidewalk. I mean, it's like, there's a really nice sidewalk with a little bridge. I mean, it's not like the north side is like,
It
And
is a
in fact,
walk.
I think the north end is growing quicker than the south side. The southern part, I mean, the inventory is pretty much done on the southern side, but the northern side, you still have growth. I mean, look, you got Restoration Harbor growing.
Yeah, that's going to bring a lot of foot traffic. But it is a discussion that needs to be addressed. I see the sidewalk. There's no sidewalk, really. We should have sidewalk on both sides when you want to encourage people to walk. And if that involves
Yeah.
changes, maybe that's part of what we need to do.
So in general, very interesting. I think that is kind of a missing opportunity. Details would be very difficult to work out, but that I'm in support of the concept. Parking seems to be the biggest issue.
Yeah, needs to be addressed.
Yeah, I'm in support of it too.
Park in front of Barbara's house.
Okay. Objective 8. Promote the character and design of the Washington Street commercial area in a manner that integrates it into the immediate neighborhood and town as a whole. Ensuring that new commercial development is pedestrian-oriented so that the area is not transformed into an auto-oriented commercial strip or a series of inwardly focused malls. Yeah, that makes sense. 8.2 talked about screen parking. Where did I see that? Oh, 8.3. Screen parking. The only thing problem with that is then people don't know it's there. Like the parking behind Stewart.
Right.
Nobody knows it's there. Why would you want to screen parking?
To put active uses up the street so that it's not less suburban in design, and big parking lots don't. For example, when you look at the Marketplace and the big parking lot that just borders the street, it's very passive and you don't realize what the property has to offer. But if you bring buildings up and you have active uses and outdoor uses, it's part of great urban infill.
De-emphasizing the automobile,
Yeah.
True.
pedestrian.
Down to.
About walking.
Sure. Okay. 8.7.
Yeah.
Can we strike stacking? Is that what you
Definitely
were?
don't want
That's
stacking.
that's part of it. Yeah. So I've actually just been dealing with all of the options for the stacking parking, and there's a lot of creative options, but
Not
one of
stacking.
them is actually you can do stacking and it can go below grade. So I think I'm actually I'm okay with creative options, but it's the height that I'm concerned about. You know, if it gets
We had meant tandem here, using stacking to designate that for
Okay.
commercial rather than up
Yeah.
and down, but maybe we need to clarify it if that's what everyone here thought.
yeah.
Oh, you're saying
It's
like.
it's going to
I
be a
see.
much more active
Yeah.
discussion point. So
They meant
with
the
city
ones
lift
They meant
and
tandem.
all of those
Tandem,
options.
Got it.
Yeah, tandem parking's different.
And it would be
I was also taking it in a different manner. So in that same discussion with like city lifts and tandem parking, there's also been a lot of discussion about having designated places for Uber and Lyft to
Right.
drop off and stuff, because I think the de-emphasizing of bringing your own personal car, but it's also trying to have safely drop off and pick up people, maybe entering the discussion more and more, especially around the hospitality.
And we do address those issues in the circulation element, but I think it's a good idea to tie it back to land use as well.
And maybe that brings up a bigger question. I mean, part of recent activities, it's how regulations will adapt. You know, maybe you know, I don't know Yountville's ratio for hotel. Is it 1-to-1 for hotel key to parking?
1.14.
1.4.
1.14.
Okay. You know, is that, you know, it seems like the trend is more and more people will be not necessarily using their own individual car to come. So if we're looking at the 10-year or 20-year thought process, is there a way to draft a policy to maybe adapt as the industry changes this round? So that-
Particularly parking standards.
yeah, parking standards particularly, yeah.
Yeah. We've got something in one of these on that.
Okay, good point. Nine, are we still on 9? No, 9's new. Ensure that new commercial development maintains an appropriate balance between the needs of residents, visitors, and businesses to assure livable community for residents. Anybody have any comments, questions?
9.5.
Yep. That's the one I had.
So, just to start off that one, it seems like that's been it's been an odd or unique item where, you know, if you have a wine tasting shop, you have to have some local serving component there. How is that working for locals in general, and is there any other opportunities? I know everything has to be on a business decision. You know, I know it's difficult to to have such a limited pool to serve, and so you can't have necessarily a standalone business, which has been the problem, but just
Not sure it was ever written that it would support the locals, though. Wasn't it just retail diversity?
Yeah, it's meant
Yeah.
for retail diversity.
Okay.
So we don't just become this town
Yeah.
that has one thing.
Yeah.
And it actually, the same policy could be applied right now. We call it the retail diversity and always tie it to wine tasting rooms. But let's say all of Washington Street only had galleries, and that's the only thing. Everything was just a gallery. Then that policy would start applying to galleries too, saying you're a gallery, but you gotta sell
Yeah.
something else other than art.
The idea for this new policy, and maybe we need to word it a little differently, is to potentially allow greater infill development on the V Marketplace or the vintage parcels if we're able to bring buildings closer to the street, we're able to get office and dwellings up above, we're able to get different retail uses that are not wine related, and that's for property that's already pretty much fully developed to its maximum FAR, but would be willing to push that envelope if we could achieve these things. Reading it here, I can see that is not clear of what we're trying to present, although this is definitely one of the concepts we're presenting at the workshop too.
And how would you, so you give somebody a bonus, an FAR bonus to put in a clothing store, and then later they want to change the use.
A deed restriction.
Yeah.
So you can do that?
And
You can say this can only be a clothing store? This
It's also
can't be
in
a wine
the-
tasting room, or?
the details of the zoning ordinance as to what uses are allowed, then it's specifically approved by use permit with requirements and then deed restrictions. This is also one of the ones that will be hard to figure out the details as we move forward to really be really clear what the intent is.
And whether, rather than it saying it's a clothing store now shall henceforth only be clothing store, it would say it would be something other than non-food or non-wine. Rather than saying it's only this, it's everything but this.
Yeah.
And then who would determine appropriate uses? Just anything?
The
It would be
town
general,
council upon
non-food,
the use
non-wine?
permit
Okay,
area,
okay.
phase of doing it.
So original permits would be approved by the council, but use permits run with the land. So if a new tenant wanted to come in and the use was substantially similar to that approved use, they could move right in without other approval. If it was a change, it would go back before council.
Okay. Most of these seem like good new policies, difficult to write, though.
Yeah.
Good neighbor, code enforcement, things like that. Market-driven?
These are two new alternate policies that we're recommending maybe as a way to replace the retail diversity ordinance. As Member Denton mentioned, is it really getting what we want? Is cookware or handwriting instruments really what achieves market diversity here? And the council's taken the direction that we haven't wanted to do market caps, but so those are basically the options. Is it a market-driven economy, or do we want caps when we say, 14 tasting rooms is too many, no more. We'll entertain other uses only. So we really wanted to get feedback from the community as to how they think those policies are working.
Yeah.
I think the retail diversity provides just a little interest. Obviously, little of it is probably determined local serving, and there isn't really any way to legislate local serving. Use caps? I
No
don't know.
strong opinions here on this too?
Yeah, unfortunately, local serving the business has to make profit. We don't have any local serving business can make a profit in this town because the
Yeah.
resident number is so small.
Right.
Yeah, that is
We've
a
moved
dilemma.
from that designation in the general plan. We don't use the term local serving because we can't really regulate that. In a small community like Yountville, we don't have the market share to support local serving. So they were issues that were raised in the 96 general plan, and we've pretty much eliminated them from this general
It'd be
plan.
nice if we could, but we can't.
We're not a big enough town, I don't think.
No.
I mean, someone asked me the other day why, the town would be so complete if we had a dry cleaner and a hardware store. And I'm like, we could do that, but then there would be vacancies and it would continue to have, so you have to figure it out, like, what do you want? What's best use for that space for the town in terms of forward progress, having a vacant building that keeps trying to get reused, repurposed, but it can't be something that could be potentially successful. And, it's like, I just think you're limited because of, the population and how many people have these as second homes and yada, yada, yada. So
And how close Napa is.
Yeah.
Can let them know that there's going to be a restoration hardware store.
Hardly the same.
How
We
can
are getting a
afford
hardware
the
store.
to not a
That's
store?
called Restoration Hardware.
The town manager always comments that Browns Valley is just as far from
Right.
from Napa's retail businesses as Yountville really is. You
That's a good
hop in the car and drive just as long, and
Yeah.
Yeah.
Get to
just-
grocery store.
To the
It's 9
Whole
miles.
Foods, Target, Trader Joe's area in
Yeah.
particular.
Yeah.
I don't know. Market driven versus use caps. I don't.
I have no
One
idea.
easier, harder to manage for you guys. I don't really see.
well, I think
It's
use
policy.
caps is a way to deal with uses that have become overly saturated. And at one point in Yountville, those may have been antique stores. Now it's tasting rooms, maybe restaurants and
There used to be
inns.
furniture stores.
But the town also has to look at the economy that it has and the benefits from tourism. And if we're to cut that off or change it, what does that
Right.
mean for funding of the town budget and the maintenance of the
Tax.
town parks and a lot of the things that locals love about the area? I thought it was interesting when Sharon Stensis in her editor column was writing of was commenting on what Yountville was like after the fires, and there were no tourists, and it was sort of depressing. Or
Yeah, it wasn't
there was
fun.
something. There was
Empty street.
the activity was gone, and so it was just
Yeah.
quiet and just
Right.
just something was missing. So it was the first time I've heard someone say, "Oh, maybe the tourists add something."
You think? But, the other thing too is, I think of Yountville as being so uniquely Yountville. It's not like St. Helena is like Yountville. I mean, what we're providing as a very small town is exactly what visitors want. That's why they purposely come to this town. They don't purposely come to St. Helena the way they purposely come to Yountville. It's the accessibility, and it is the diversity in the fact that they can walk, eat, shop, drink, not have to drive, and that's, to me, that's diversity in the town. That's something that kind of keeps the town moving. I mean, yeah, the fires, it's a perfect example. I mean, so the local scouts have their town back, and it was like, well,
That wasn't fun.
yeah, that's not so
Yeah.
fun.
Okay. Market driven probably makes more sense. Makes a little more logical.
Yes.
Objective 11, continue to maintain and improve all public facilities and services for residents. Those all made sense to me. Did anybody have any comments?
Made sense to me as well.
Okay. 12, continue to support the agricultural use adjacent to town in the Napa Valley. Those all made, anybody have any comments there?
Just a clarification on 12.1, on staff evaluation, towards the bottom of the comment, it says component of DC. What's DC?
Domain Shandong.
Oh, thanks.
Okay.
District of Columbia.
Yeah, well, hey,
Who knew?
so many acronyms.
I know.
Objective 13, identify, preserve, and protect potential and listed historic resources. So these are all new programs. Yeah, I think that would be a good idea. I think there's some things out there that aren't taken into account. There were some really cool train trestles in Upper Hopper Creek that got torn down when they cleaned it out. They were really neat, old history. Those got wiped out. So yeah, I think it would be a good idea to inventory what's out there.
So, I was going to ask a question. Is there any entertainment of having kind of a historical resource inventory similar to downtown Napa, where there's a category 1, 2, or 3 association put towards that. In other words, if you're unfamiliar with that process, and I may have them reverse, but if it's a category 1, then the entire structure is considered valuable. If it's a category 3, it's just the front facade that is
2 is
considered.
somewhere in between.
Yeah, and 2 is somewhere in between, yeah.
That could
We
always
just
be
have very outdated historic resources or references here because the inventory was dated in 74. It hasn't been updated. There are no specific standards that apply, so we're pretty behind when it comes to historic resources.
But one of the recent examples would have been the cafe on the north end of town, whether that...
You mean the market?
Yeah, the market. Yes, thank you. That would have helped that
Yeah.
discussion along
A lot.
a lot, yeah. We had.
Right.
Yeah.
13.3.
Yeah.
And that's
That's pretty much it,
the
yeah.
whole policy, unless you have other questions about the historic resources.
Do they have to move the market back up?
Not decided. Thank you for taking the time to go through that. I know we had this sort of one chance with you to get real direct feedback, so we appreciate it.
I have one quick question.
Uh-huh.
With this new mandate from Sacramento, how's that play into the overall impact of how we're going to revise the land use and the FARs and all that?
The mandate
dwelling?
regarding second dwellings?
Yeah. And the
We-
parking and all that. Yeah.
We updated the town's second dwelling ordinance, or the granting ordinance, to address the new state laws.
Right.
So
That came through us,
incorporated
right?
it in.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Okay, so we're good on that.
Mhm.
Okay.
Okay, it's a lot of work, you guys.
A lot of work by you.
I
by
went to
just
a workshop
reviewing
on
it.
the 21st.
Yeah, I want to. Are you?
I have to go back to the East Coast.
Okay, does anybody else have any comments or anything? Okay, any staff or board reports?
Just want from staff to give an extra strong plug of the workshop 1 week from today. What we just did right now is kind of what we're going to be doing at the workshop. The workshop is going to be very visual heavy. And so while we'll be asking the policies, we won't be giving everyone a matrix like this, but
Right.
rather we'll
Yeah, it's
be
gonna be so
putting
much
it
more
into
fun.
practice. So instead of saying, well, how do you feel about maybe going 3 stories?
Yeah.
There'll be a nice picture of a 3-story building. There might be a 2-story one right next to back of sidewalk that gets to, how do you feel about lessening FAR setback standards in the primary commercial district? It's going to be a very
Visual,
interactive,
yeah.
visual-based workshop that we are very excited
So
about.
people
and we
have
think
to,
people will have a
they
lot of fun.
they have to RSVP or sign up?
Nope. It's
They
at the
just show
community
up?
center at 6:30. We want the entire town to come. We're expecting.
Is there a panel?
There's some sort of
Nope.
info that we can share with others. I can.
They've been getting it out on Nextdoor
Yep.
and
If you go
Yeah,
on
but
envisionyountville.com, it's right there, and I will also
So I can
email
use
all
that
of
link.
you
Okay.
a little
Like a PD or a JPEG.
a little JPEG
Yeah.
blurb or a PDF that if you want to forward it on to your friends, I can for sure do that.
JPEG, yeah.
Yep.
it'd be
Can
good
post that.
for us too to go and get
It would.
the pulse.
Absolutely. Because while the last workshop was a very broad, how do you feel about Yountville? This one is land use. How do you feel
Right.
about development in Yountville? And so it's going to be fascinating. We know there's also a lot of different opinions
Yes.
there. And that's why we're
Yeah.
going to calm everyone down. We've ordered cookies. So it's going to be great.
You need some bottles of wine? That's going to be, you might want some wine for that one.
Or after the meeting.
Okay,
but that is
excellent.
staff's only report. We want to update you, but you already saw the recent decision by the town council to uphold the decision of the CDRB on that appeal. So
That was nice.
that,
Appreciated that. Okay, good. Then I'll move to adjourn the meeting. Thank you, everybody.
Yes, just we have to go.
You made it.